Okay, let's begin. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about output in SLA. Output. So, what is output? Output is the production of language or the language produced. It can mean these two things. And when we say language production, we are talking about speaking and writing. So speaking and writing are the two main ways of output or production. And of course, here we are talking about spoken language such as English and Japanese. But if we talk about a sign language such as American Sign Language or Japanese Sign Language, then signing would be output, of course. But we're not going to talk about sign language in this video. So speaking and writing are the two main ways of output. So when we say something, that's output. And when we think about output in second language acquisition, a good starting point is to think about input in second language acquisition. So let's think about input first. Language, whether it's a first language or a second language, cannot be acquired without input. But not all kinds of input are helpful. So what we call comprehensible input, that is at the I+1 stage, is necessary for second language acquisition. So this is what the input hypothesis proposed by Krashen says. So the input hypothesis says we need to have comprehensible input at I+1. We need that for second language acquisition to take place. And this is the starting point. So input is important. Then what about output? So does output play any role in second language acquisition? And actually, in Krashen's input hypothesis, output plays no role in second language acquisition. So output is not important. According to this view, second language acquisition is possible even if we don't practice speaking at all, because comprehensible input promotes the growth of second language competence, which in turn makes it possible for us to speak the second language. So all we need is comprehensible input. We don't really need output. So this is Krashen's view. But other researchers have opposed to this idea. So they had different ideas. And actually, counter evidence has been provided against the input hypothesis. So there is evidence against the input hypothesis. So this person called Swain, she studied immersion programs. And if you don't know what immersion is, in an immersion school, subjects such as science and mathematics are taught in the L2 rather than the L2 itself is taught. So for example, let's say these are Japanese and this is native English speaking teacher. So in a language class, this teacher would teach English, but in an immersion school, this teacher teaches subjects such as mathematics in English And of course, English is a second language for these Japanese students. So these Japanese students learn mathematics in their L2. So this is what immersion schools do. And in an immersion school, in an immersion program, there is a plenty of comprehensible input. And that's good, of course, according to the input hypothesis. And Swain found that immersion students in Canada were fluent in their L2. This is in line with the input hypothesis. This is what the input hypothesis predicts. So those immersion students in Canada, they could speak their L2 fluently. However, if you look at immersion students more closely, actually, it's often the case that they have not achieved a high level of grammatical accuracy. So this is exactly what Swain found in the immersion students that she studied. So those immersion students had not achieved a high level of grammatical accuracy, even though they could speak their second language fluently. So it seems that comprehensible input alone is not sufficient to cause the acquisition of the second language grammar. So what is the problem? Comprehending input. So when you try to comprehend input, you are actually focusing on meaning, not grammar. So comprehending input is often a meaning-focused process. So we can sometimes ignore the grammatical aspects of input and still comprehend the message in that input. So for example, if someone says, I have many books, we can actually ignore this plural s here, but still understand, comprehend the message of this sentence. And if this speaker actually has many books in his or her hands, then that extra linguistic context helps us understand this sentence as well. So when we try to comprehend input, sometimes, not always, sometimes we can ignore the grammar. So comprehension does not always require grammatical processing. However, according to Swain, production or output requires grammatical processing. So in production or output, we need to make sentences according to the grammar. So we cannot ignore the grammar when we make sentences, when we produce sentences. So for example, this sentence, John likes Mary. This is grammatical, of course. But what about this one? John, Mary likes. John, Mary likes. This is ungrammatical. So if we say this to mean John likes Mary, do you think it makes sense? Well, maybe, maybe not. So if you say something ungrammatical, it may make sense sometimes, but other times it may not make sense. So, and actually in English we can say John, Mary likes. So here we moved John from this position to this position. This process is called topicalization. So we are making John as the topic. So we topicalized the object here and moved it to the front of the sentence. But because John is the object, this sentence means Mary likes John, actually. So if we say this, we cannot mean this. It's the reverse. So if you don't pay attention to the grammar, if you don't care about the grammar, then yes, if we don't pay attention to the grammar when we output, our sentences may not make sense, may not be comprehensible at all, or may be difficult for the listener to comprehend. So we need to pay attention to the grammar. We need to focus on the grammar when we output, when we try to make ourselves understood or comprehended. So, and if we look at immersion programs from the perspectives of input and output, we can say that immersion programs offer a lot of comprehensible input in the L2. We can say this. However, students in those programs, students in immersion programs, they do not always have many opportunities to speak the L2. So they don't have many opportunities for output. And these researchers, Allen and his or her colleagues, they found that immersion students' output in the L2 is actually minimal. It's quite limited. And even if they, these students say something in the L2, their sentences turn out to be very short. So Swain thought that, okay, maybe the lack of output opportunities in immersion programs, that may be the reason for the lack of grammatical accuracy. Now, this is what Swain thought. So Swain considered, yes, output plays important roles in second language acquisition. So this is in contrast with Krashen's input hypothesis, which says output plays no role in second language acquisition. And according to Swain, output plays 3 major roles in second language acquisition. First, output leads to noticing. Second, output enables hypothesis testing. Third, output prompts metalinguistic reflection. So I'm going to explain each of these. So the role of output in noticing. When the learner says something and the listener doesn't comprehend it, the learner notices that there is something wrong with the way he or she said it. So for example, if the learner says, I am like tennis, but here the learner wants to mean I like tennis. And the listener would say, sorry, you like tennis. So so here the listener couldn't really understand what the learner wanted to mean. So the learner actually failed in producing comprehensible output. And this failure in producing comprehensible output, in this case, may lead to noticing. So because this initial utterance was not comprehensible, at least it was difficult to comprehend for the listener, the listener said sorry, and then this may or may not, I don't know, this may lead to the noticing on the part of the learner who said this. So because this because the listener said this, the learner may notice that there was something wrong with he or she, something wrong with the way he or she said it. So output may lead to noticing. And what about hypothesis testing? Usually, second language learners form hypotheses about their L2. So, for example, they might think that the past tense form of eat is eat it. Of course, this is wrong. This hypothesis is not correct. And if they say something based on their hypothesis, and if they observe the listener's reactions, then they can test the correctness of the hypothesis, whether their hypothesis is correct or not. So if the learner says, I ate curry last night, the listener, who is a native speaker, might say, oh, you ate curry last night. Nice. And then the listener can think about learner. The learner can think about his or her hypothesis. Well, I thought the past tense form of eat was eat it, but this native speaker said ate, so maybe my hypothesis is wrong. So if the learner outputs, if the learner says something based on their hypothesis, they can test that hypothesis. They can test whether their hypothesis is correct or not by observing the listener's reaction. And what is metalinguistic reflection? If the learner says something in their L2, then they can reflect on it, on what they said. So to reflect on something means to think about that thing, which is often a past event, something that happened in the past. So if they say something like, I ate curry last night, and they themselves think about this. So they reflect on this utterance, on their own utterance. So their reflection might go like this. I said eat it, but is it correct? Wait a minute, the past tense form of eat is ate, not eat it. So eat is an irregular verb. Okay, next time I'll say ate. I will not make the same mistake. So this is an example of metalinguistic reflection. So the learner reflects on what he or she said. So so metalinguistic reflection on the learner's own output may improve his or her grammatical ability. And metalinguistic, this is a very difficult word. So you need to understand the meaning of meta. Meta X is actually X about X. So meta-analysis is an analysis about analysis. Meta-knowledge is knowledge about knowledge. So if you know something, you have knowledge of that thing. And if you have meta-knowledge, you know that you know something. So meta-language is language about language. So examples would include these. verb, noun, word, sentence, past tense. These are language to describe language. So these are examples of metalanguage. And this is an example of metalinguistic reflection. Okay. So here we are reflecting on language, using language. But we can reflect on the same utterance, we can reflect on this utterance in a different way. For example, we can reflect on it semantically in terms of meaning. So our semantic reflection may be something like, oh, wait a minute, I said last night, but it wasn't last night. It was actually 3 days ago when I had curry. So this is a semantic reflection. We're not thinking about the grammar. We're thinking about whether our utterance was correct or not. I mean, whether it's true or not. So it isn't true that I ate curry last night. It isn't true. Okay, so coming back to Swain's theory or hypothesis, Swain proposed the output hypothesis. Okay, Krashen proposed the input hypothesis, and Swain proposed the output hypothesis. And according to the output hypothesis, second language acquisition is driven by both input and output. So this hypothesis admits the importance of input, of course, but it also says output is important. So output does play an important role in second language acquisition. And actually, the key component of this hypothesis is comprehensible output. Comprehensible output. So it's a bit like comprehensible input. But here we are talking about comprehensible output. So the output hypothesis is sometimes called the comprehensible output hypothesis. And according to this hypothesis, second language acquisition is promoted when learners make efforts to make their output comprehensible to the listener or to the reader, maybe. So when they say something, when they output, they try to make their sentence understandable or comprehensible to the listener. And through that process, second language acquisition will progress. And according to this theory, this hypothesis, pushed output is especially important. So what is pushed output? So pushed output is output that second language learners make when they are pushed to say their message accurately and clearly. And especially more accurately, more clearly than the initial attempt. When they try to say their message first. So for pushed output, learners make efforts to make their output more comprehensible. And here we use the word push, but here it means to try to make someone do something that they don't want to do, maybe. So usually to push means to move something away from yourself, but here the word push is a bit like the word make. And learners can be pushed when there is a communication breakdown due to incomprehensible output. So if they say something and if that's not comprehensible, then they have a communication breakdown. So if the learner says, I am like tennis, to mean I like tennis, the listener may say sorry. So there is a communication breakdown. So the listener can't comprehend the learner's utterance. So the listener says sorry. And actually this pushes the learner to make his or her output more comprehensible, more accurate, or clearer. So because there is a communication breakdown due to incomprehensible output, here in this example, the learner is pushed to say his or her message more clearly, more accurately. But of course, if the learner says, table tennis is like tennis on a table, so here there is no grammatical mistake, I hope. And the listener might say, oh, exactly, and there is no communication breakdown. So in this case, the second language learner is not pushed at all. But that's not enough for second language acquisition to take place. Another important thing is modified output. When second language learners are pushed to say something more accurately and clearly than the initial utterance, they often have to modify their output. So for example, if the learner says, I am like tennis, to mean I like tennis, and if the listener says, sorry, the learner might say, I mean, I like tennis. So this is an example of modified output. So this is the second output. This is the first output. This is the initial attempt to say his or her message. But this was a bit difficult for the listener to comprehend. So it's very strange to say someone, a human, is like tennis. We can say table tennis is like tennis, but humans are not like tennis. They may like tennis, but they are not like tennis. Tennis is a sport. So this utterance may be a little bit difficult to comprehend, and the listener says sorry, and in response to this, the learner says, I mean, I like tennis. So here the learner has modified his or her utterance. So this is modified output. So modified output is critical for second language acquisition. It's necessary for second language acquisition to take place, and for the learner to take advantage of this opportunity. But of course, second language learners may not modify their output even if they are pushed. So for example, if the learner says, I am like tennis, to mean I like tennis, and the listener says, sorry, you like tennis? And the learner says, yeah. And then this doesn't involve modified output. So the learner's initial output is not modified. So if learners do not modify their output, they lose opportunities to improve their grammatical accuracy. So they need to take advantage of this kind of opportunity. So this actually prompts the learner to modify their output, but here the learner missed that opportunity. So the learner didn't modify his or her output. So to promote second language acquisition, we need to have opportunities for output. So we need to give second language learners opportunities for output. they need to have opportunities for output, not only for input, but also for output. Opportunities for output are necessary. And learners need to make their output comprehensible. They need to try to make their output comprehensible to the listener or to the reader. And they need to be pushed to say the message more accurately and clearly than their initial output, their initial utterance, when they tried to say the message initially. And learners need to modify their output when they are pushed. And is there any evidence for the output hypothesis? Yes, there is evidence for the output hypothesis. So there is evidence that modified output leads to second language acquisition. So, these people studied vocabulary learning, and output, modified output, led to the acquisition of second language vocabulary. And these researchers, they studied things like relative clause and interrogative. This is a question. And it's very difficult to form interrogatives in English because it involves rearrangement of word orders. So here we are talking about word order rules, and modified output led to the acquisition of word order rules. And also there is one study which looked at the acquisition of grammatical morphemes. In this case, regular past tense. But I think the evidence from this research is a bit weak. The evidence is actually mixed, because modified output worked only for some students, not for some learners. Sorry, not for all learners. And there is more evidence. So it seems that modified output works, but the effects seem clearer in the acquisition of vocabulary and word order rules than in the acquisition of grammatical morphemes. But this is a kind of ironic, because this whole research about output actually started from Swain's observation about immersion students who showed poor grammatical accuracy. And generally, poor accuracy in the use of grammatical morphemes is a feature of immersion students. So they can speak very fluently, but sometimes they are not so accurate in using grammatical morphemes. So this is the starting point of research into output. But actually, we don't have much evidence for the acquisition of grammatical morphemes facilitated by output. And why is that so? Because grammatical morphemes such as third person singular s, for example, are difficult to notice. So noticing is a very important component of the output hypothesis. Where is it? Noticing. So for acquisition to take place, the learner has to notice that there is something wrong. But things like third person singular s, they are difficult. Grammatical morphemes are difficult to notice. So output or modified output does help second language acquisition, but some grammatical problems especially problems with grammatical morphemes, may still persist. They may still remain. Okay, these are the references. Thanks for listening.